Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness?
Maybe you're scared of being criticized.
Loss of interest, aches and pain.
Always thinking something terrible.
Ask your doctor about Effects or XR. Ask your doctor about Cymbalta.
Talk to your doctor about Zoloft.
So talk to your healthcare professional.
Get with your doctor today.
Your doctor.
Tell your doctor.
Contact your doctor immediately.
Talk with your doctor.
Il y a plus de 40 ans, des psychiatres de renom se sont réunis à Porto Rico pour planifier le futur.
We see a developing potential for nearly a total control of human emotional status, mental functioning, and will to act.
Leur plan? Créer d'ici l'an 2000 une gamme de psychotropes contrôlant chaque aspect du comportement humain.
I was diagnosed with depression and put on Paxil.
ADD, and I was prescribed Ritalin.
General anxiety disorder, prescribed Zoloft.
Bipolar disorder, and I take lithium.
PTSD, Zoloft.
I was on Paxil.
When they placed me on Zoloft.
They gave me Adderall.
I was prescribed Siptamu,
Tegretol,
Lexapro, Depakote,
Stelazine,
Adderall,
Concerta, Thorazine,
Prozac,
Lorazepam,
Efficace,
Clonazepam,
Ritalin,
dexamphetamine,
Paxil,
Silert,
Prozac,
Adderall,
Elavil,
Depakote, Wellbutrin, Seroquel, etc., etc.
100 millions de personnes dans le monde prennent des psychotropes. Comment en est-on arrivé là? Les psychiatres les ont convaincus qu'elles étaient malades.
They want you to think you're diseased from birth, and that all those experiences of life, childhood and adolescence and teenage years and adulthood and being a senior citizen, that these are all various stages of disease.
Because let's face it, we've all been depressed at one time. We've all been anxious at one time. These are normal emotions that we feel.
Every emotional and spiritual problem is reduced to a label.
And of course, all of those diseases require pharmaceutical treatments. This is big, big business.
Tout en encaissant des revenus considérables, en prétendant être des professionnels de la santé, les psychiatres reconnaissent ouvertement que leur profession n'a aucun fondement scientifique.
You don't really have any specific blood tests or other tests that are definitive for any mental illness whatsoever.
It would be neat if it would become much more scientific.
Well, if you go to my office and you tell me that you're depressed, there's nothing, and no blood sample or whatever, no tests.
There are not current available tests to verify your diagnosis.
I don't use any tests.
You do not have a test to say, well, this is this disorder and this is the best medication for this disorder.
For many years we thought we had the tests nailed down, but it turned out that they weren't of any value.
If you don't know what's causing the symptoms, then to give somebody something to alleviate the symptoms is close to impossible.
By the time a drug's approved and it hits the general population, we don't know even 50% of the side effects that are involved with that drug.
And these pills cause heart attacks and liver problems and immune system problems and lots of other medical problems. So you're playing with fire.
Chaque jour, on estime que les psychotropes causent des incidents graves. Et si les psychiatres et les firmes pharmaceutiques sont conscients du danger que ces psychotropes représentent, leurs patients, qui ne se doutent de rien, en subissent quant à eux les effets dévastateurs.
Everything became worse. Each mood swing was worse.
He would have chronic headaches, chronic, nausea, not feeling good.
She was very agitated, very, very jumpy.
She was having horrible hallucinations.
Her personality was disintegrating.
Once he started on that drug, the cloud just stayed over him and stayed over him and stayed over him. It got darker and darker.
He thought there wasn't anything worth living to kill himself. That was not Matthew. That was the drugs.
At least I would like to have said, I love you. I didn't get a chance to do that.
Non seulement les psychotropes mettent en danger chaque jour des millions d'individus, mais ils tuent chaque mois près de 3000 personnes. Mais les pertes humaines n'auraient jamais été aussi élevées si les psychiatres n'avaient pas travaillé main dans la main avec les firmes pharmaceutiques pour promouvoir leurs médicaments auprès de médecins dans le monde entier. Aujourd'hui, 70% des psychotropes sont prescrits par des médecins généralistes. Comment en est-on arrivé là? Une question de marketing.
It's about creating a good story that uses science, that convinces a physician
to think about writing a prescription.
This is not science. This is incredibly effective marketing. It has nothing to do with science.
They use what I call statistical contortionism. Basically just skew the numbers, make everything look fantastic, you hide the bad numbers.
They're learning every trick in the book. They're evolving into efficient marketing machines, and it's working.
There's definitely an unholy alliance between psychiatry and pharmaceutical sales. That's a marriage made in heaven.
They're like conjoined twins. They're joined at the wallet.
Avec 374 maladies mentales dans le manuel diagnostique de la psychiatrie, et plus à venir, les affaires sont en pleine expansion. Les firmes pharmaceutiques ont élargi leur registre de psychotropes de 44 en 1966 à 174 aujourd'hui. Combinés, les 5 psychotropes qui se vendent le plus rapportent plus que le produit national brut de plus de la moitié des pays sur Terre pris individuellement. En tout, la psychiatrie engrange un tiers de billions de dollars par an. Comment en est-on arrivé là? C'est une histoire de tromperie qui peut être difficile à croire, mais qu'il est fatal d'ignorer.
We took him to a psychiatrist, and within a matter of minutes, yeah, she's ADHD, and here's your drug.
Went on to Medicaid, and 5 minutes later, he was on Zyprexa.
He saw the psychiatrist and prescribed the medicine for 20 minutes.
The guy didn't even look at her. He talked to her a little bit. Now, how can you tell if somebody's ADHD or not ADHD from just a few minutes talking to her?
Next thing I know, I'm getting handed a handful of Xanax. That's how easy it is to get these drugs. Just so easy. It was just passed to me like candy. That simple.
If a person were to walk in off the street, sit down with a psychiatrist, the chances of him being prescribed a drug before he were to leave the office, I would have to put it at 100%.
Psychiatrists prescribe drugs. They might have different ways of diagnosing, they might have different ways of interacting with a patient, but it's rare to find a psychiatrist that uses no drugs.
The psychiatrists today are, in quotes, admitting they can't cure these mental illnesses, and they're therefore going to manage your illness by using a drug.
50 years ago, a person who was going through a divorce would have relied on family, friends, clergy, and even the family doctor to a certain extent for conversation to work through the issue. They certainly wouldn't have been medicated.
C'était avant l'ère des psychotropes. Les psychiatres, qui avaient le statut le plus bas au sein de la profession médicale, travaillaient presque exclusivement dans des hôpitaux psychiatriques. Sans traitement, ils avaient peu de chances d'être respectés comme véritables médecins par le public et le milieu médical.
Psychiatrists had for years been on the fringe of medicine. Typically, the standard doctor internist would have very low regard for psychiatrists because it was understood not to be a very clear science or art.
Psychiatrists wanted to be viewed as physicians, as doctors, and in order to be viewed as physicians and doctors, the people they dealt with had to be viewed as patients. And if doctors dealt with diseases, then their patients had to be diseased.
Psychiatrists had a wonderful opportunity, they felt, to become respected in the eyes of their peers. They raced to create a whole diagnostic book called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which was created by consensus.
A group of psychologists and psychiatrists get together, and if they have made common observations, they have a vote and they now classify a new disease. And they give it a number and it graduates into the DSM classification.
And it's a dangerous book. It's a book that has many disorders that could apply to any one of us because the disorders are not real medical diseases. And it's things that apply to nearly all of us at times. Are you afraid of meeting new people? Are you afraid to speak in front of a large crowd of people? Does it make you nervous to go and to talk to your boss about a complaint?
You can invent a mental disorder based on a checklist of symptoms, and that is exactly how the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the billing Bible for psychiatry, works.
Depuis la première édition du DSM en 1952, le nombre de diagnostics n'a cessé de croître. Du livret peu épais de 130 pages énumérant 106 prétendus troubles mentaux, le DSM est devenu un volume de 886 pages. Aux États-Unis, les psychiatres doivent utiliser ce manuel pour faire un diagnostic, prescrire des psychotropes et facturer leurs services. L'industrie psychiatrique utilise actuellement le DSM pour encaisser plus de 72 milliards de dollars des assurances publiques et privées.
The DSM is used to diagnose and then give a label, and the label is used for billing purposes. That's how they get paid.
You have to have a term in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in order to then call it a disease and treat it as a disease and write a prescription for it.
And so because they can vote it in, they can create, and then the drug industry can just take over and market their drugs for those new disorders.
And those drugs were welcomed by psychiatry leaders because it made us real doctors.
Of course, first the public had to believe that there was something wrong with them, and that that thing wrong was biochemical, and that that could then be treated by a drug which was supposed to cure all.
And so it was relatively easy, I think, to say, well, look, let's start looking at mental illness as fundamentally a matter of chemical imbalance in the brain.
Chemical imbalance is a term that's used as a marketing ploy, as opposed to anything that there's scientific evidence to support.
Nobody has yet measured, demonstrated, or created a test to show that somebody has a chemical imbalance in their brain, period.
How do you market a drug that restores the chemical balance or corrects a chemical imbalance? How can you do that in good conscience if you don't even know what one is?
The whole myth of the chemical imbalance was created to sell drugs.
Et si les psychiatres et les firmes pharmaceutiques ont utilisé ce mythe pour gagner des milliards en procurant des quantités considérables de psychotropes aux consommateurs qui ne se doutaient de rien, ce sont ces derniers qui en subissent les conséquences. On estime que la moitié des Américains qui se suicident sont sous psychotropes. Chaque année, on estime que les psychotropes tuent plus de 2,5 fois plus de gens que les homicides. Et à qui a-t-on confié la tâche de protéger le public contre les dangers de ces psychotropes dangereux? Aux États-Unis, à l'Agence de contrôle pharmaceutique et alimentaire, la FDA, dont le comité consultatif est surtout constitué de psychiatres qui font la navette entre l'industrie pharmaceutique, le milieu universitaire, leur cabinet privé et la fonction publique, ce que l'on appelle le tourniquet.
The revolving door at FDA is one of the primary reasons why the system that we have works so poorly. That revolving door is a direct result of the fact that a group of people with the same mindset are put into positions of being regulators and in the position of being formulators and sellers and marketers.
The panels that are formed by the FDA to evaluate these drugs, the psychiatrists who are on those panels, almost all of them have conflicts of interest where they have directly or indirectly received funding from the very industry and the very parties within the industry whose drugs they are evaluating.
So there's this tight little relationship between psychiatry, pharmaceutical industry, and FDA where they each mutually support each other, and yet the mental health of the population does not improve.
Prenons par exemple le comité d'évaluation des psychotropes de la FDA qui a approuvé l'antidépresseur Paxil. Chaque psychiatre membre de ce comité a des liens financiers avec l'industrie pharmaceutique. Et ces conflits d'intérêts sont devenus si courants qu'ils ont fini par susciter une investigation de la part du Congrès.
When I check these advisory committees who make recommendations to the FDA, and they're always approved after the advisory committee, I found that there were conflicts of interest. I found that many of the people on the advisory committees had never filed a proper report on stocks and bonds that they owned that might be viewed as a conflict of interest, and they're by law supposed to do that.
Et ce réseau de conflits d'intérêts financiers entre la psychiatrie, l'industrie pharmaceutique et la FDA s'est encore renforcé en 1992 avec le vote de la loi sur la taxe pour les utilisateurs de psychotropes, encore appelée la PDUFA. Grâce à cette loi, la FDA peut recevoir une redevance de 100 000 $ par psychotrope pour accélérer son approbation et le mettre dans les mains des psychiatres et médecins plus rapidement que jamais.
Congress told the FDA, your job is no longer to make sure drugs are squeaky clean safe before they get out on the market. Your job now is to hurry up and get new drugs on the market faster.
It acted to set the priorities of the FDA so that if there was a fee paid for a particular drug approval, it could be put on the fast track and rushed to market with less than the usual scrutiny that the FDA would give it.
Et ce système d'approbation a été établi au détriment de la sûreté des psychotropes. Depuis que la PDUFA a été approuvée, le temps passé pour évaluer un psychotrope est passé de 2 ans en 1992 à seulement 6 mois 4 ans plus tard, alors que le nombre de nouveaux psychotropes doublait. Une approbation rapide, bien que désastreuse pour la sûreté publique, permet aux psychiatres et à l'industrie pharmaceutique de faire des profits énormes, car plus vite un psychotrope est approuvé, plus vite il rapportera. Et les profits sont importants. Chaque jour, un psychotrope rapporte en moyenne plus de 7,7 millions de $. Le Zyprexa, par exemple, rapporte 12 millions de $ chaque jour. Et même si la FDA facture $1 million pour chaque nouveau psychotrope, cette procédure d'approbation accélérée est plus utilisée que jamais.
If you look at the relationship between the FDA, the pharmaceutical industry, and the psychiatrists, there's some kind of game that they're playing there. And what is the game? Well, you could say it's money, definitely money.
And when you follow the money, you realize that there is no money in health. There's big money in disease.
That's why all you hear about is managing disease or treating disease. You don't really talk about curing disease.
And so psychiatrists have become mainstream doctors in America. And that is because of the pharmaceutical industry. They can thank the pharmaceutical industry because they become mainstream and because they have a lot more money than they used to. And the drug industry can thank them because now they have thousands of soldiers in their army distributing these drugs to everybody.
Du plus jeune au plus vieux, personne n'est à l'abri. N'importe qui peut se voir coller une étiquette correspondant à l'un des centaines de troubles factices inventés par les psychiatres, ce qui alimente une industrie pharmaceutique qui engrange des milliards de $. Et chaque jour, les psychiatres s'attaquent à de nouvelles proies. Comment s'y prennent-ils? Avec une autre étiquette psychiatrique.
How many people do you know who have been diagnosed with a mental disorder?
One. With a mental disorder? 2.
I'm sure a couple.
I know a few.
About 3 or 4 personally.
Probably 4.
Half a dozen?
I'll say about 9.
At least a dozen.
I'll bet I could count 15.
20 that I personally know.
My oldest son is diagnosed.
My mother was diagnosed.
Kid from my childhood.
My friend, the next boyfriend.
Just my grandfather and cousins. A friend of mine, friends.
A sister, my neighbors.
2 friends. A girlfriend. A niece. 1 friend.
My mother.
All my friends, everybody I know.
Chaque jour voit son lot de nouvelles maladies mentales. D'où viennent-elles? Des psychiatres, dont le manuel diagnostique et statistique permet de coller aujourd'hui une étiquette malade mentale à n'importe qui sur Terre.
Psychiatrists, I believe, they look at every human being and they divide humans into 2 classes, clients and potential clients.
We see this no more prevalent in any field than in the field of the mental disorders, where one disease after another is invented and then popularized and the public is made to worry about it.
It's a disease mongering. It's the selling of sickness. You know, sometimes it's a drug in search of a market, and it's giving public awareness to minor conditions with the ultimate goal is to sell more medications. It's not caring for people.
When you run out of symptoms, you don't have any more clientele to market to. So you have to invent disease. And with psychiatric medications, you can invent diseases all day long. Look at human variation.
Everyday things like shyness, sadness, or even situational depressions like grieving, postpartum depression, they all become studied and prescriptions start to get written for these drugs.
Before these drugs were introduced in the market, people who had these conditions would not have been given any drug at all. And so it is the branding of a disease, and it is the branding of a drug for the treatment of a disease that did not exist before the industry made the disease.
Exemple, la timidité, quelque chose de courant dans la vie, a été rebaptisé par les psychiatres trouble de l'anxiété sociale dans le manuel diagnostic et statistique.
You know, people are nervous. Well, they come up with, say, social anxiety disorder. SAD, they'll call it SAD.
And the connotation is that everybody ought to be happy and that here's a drug that can make you happy. So that a common occurrence, which is every now and again everybody's sad, we ought to be treating with a drug.
Well, then they'll get this PR firm to drum up business for this. They'll put out all these studies that find, you know, there's so many people afflicted with this SAD, you know, and they'll start putting it in magazines, they'll start putting it on TV, they'll start a patient advocacy group that say, you know, that we're all affected by this, and then they'll come out with Paxil works for this. So they go to the FDA and they said, well, we ran this study and this works for this new invented disorder, and that is SAD, social anxiety disorder, and millions of people suffer from it. And it's purely fictional. It's a normal human emotion that everybody experiences at certain times or another, but they make it into a disease.
Paxil, once it got approved by the FDA as the first antidepressant to be used for social anxiety, it took off huge. And it just moved from number 3 in the market amongst its peer drugs to number 1 in the market.
Le trouble de l'anxiété sociale est simplement l'un des nombreux troubles psychiatriques fabriqués de toutes pièces pour alimenter le boom des prescriptions de psychotropes.
Psychiatrists work to promote what the latest disease is going to be. These days, bipolar is getting that same type of promotion.
Everybody's being educated about their bipolar illness, when in fact, we know having emotional ups and downs is distinctly human.
Now bipolar is thrown around like water. You've got bipolar, I have bipolar. If I'm up today, I'm manic. If I go home tonight and I'm depressed because I'm tired, that shows I have bipolar disease. It's a lot of hokum.
Have you ever worried with seeing all the increased media on it that you might have a mental disorder?
Yes.
And which one is that?
I would say bipolar. You know, they talk about bipolar a lot.
Bipolar, I've known a lot of bipolar.
2 friends from both of them were like diagnosed with bipolar.
My neighbor, she was bipolar. I was diagnosed with bipolar.
My mother had bipolar.
He was actually bipolar. Schizophrenic bipolar. Bipolar and obsessive compulsive. Bipolar and ADHD. Bipolar disorder. Bipolar, yeah. Bipolar situation. Bipolar. Bipolar.
Bipolar.
Bipolar.
Bipolar.
There are 3 personality disorders, and then the most recent is bipolar. And that's just been in the past year.
En fer de lance du processus de vulgarisation du trouble bipolaire, surtout chez les enfants, on trouve le psychiatre Joseph Biederman. Porte-parole, conseiller et chercheur à la solde de 25 laboratoires pharmaceutiques.
In 1996, the drug companies funneled all this money to this Dr. Biederman. He's well known. He's the one that came up and said that there's bipolar disorder in little kids. This was unheard of. There was no bipolar disorder in any kids. He came up with the study and published the articles out all over the world, and other doctors followed his lead that bipolar is in little kids.
En raison de la promotion constante faite par le docteur Biederman et ses confrères, on observe une augmentation de 4000% du nombre de diagnostics du trouble bipolaire chez les enfants depuis 1994. Et le nombre d'ordonnances d'antipsychotiques prescrites aux enfants a quintuplé, atteignant à peu près 2,5 millions d'ordonnances. En 2008, le docteur Biederman a été accusé à la suite d'une enquête du Sénat de ne pas avoir déclaré 1,6 million de dollars de revenus personnels provenant de laboratoires pharmaceutiques. Mais les dégâts avaient été faits. À cause de cette lubie des troubles bipolaires inventés par le docteur Biederman, les antipsychotiques ou neuroleptiques, psychotropes parmi les plus forts que l'on prescrive, sont des drogues de choix pour la psychiatrie. Les 3 antipsychotiques qui se vendent le plus rapportent en tout 25 000 $ bruts toutes les minutes. Et même si l'industrie des psychotropes rapporte déjà beaucoup, les psychiatres font tout pour fournir des diagnostics qui la rendent encore plus lucrative.
Let's say this is the pie right here of a certain class of medications, and this is a pretty profitable pie, and everybody wants a piece of that pie. But what would happen if we made that pie even bigger? And how you make the pie even bigger is by expanding the uses for those drugs.
They've already got a drug that's approved on the shelf. They can just pull it off the shelf, rename it, repackage it, and say, look, we've got a new drug for a new illness.
When Prozac's patent ran out, that Eli Lilly had to look for a new source of profits. So all they did was change the name of the drug from Prozac to Serafem, change the color of the pill from green to pink, and marketed it for PMDD, which was newly introduced into this book.
What it tells us is that if you can come up with a label, a diagnostic label for a drug, then you can sell it like hotcakes.
It's a business model, and it's a billion-dollar business model, and it works, and it's going to keep continuing.
Aujourd'hui, n'importe qui peut, sans le savoir, prendre un psychotrope rebaptisé, reconditionné et prescrit dans un but non psychiatrique. Le Zyban, prescrit comme traitement pour les fumeurs, est en fait l'antidépresseur Wellbutrin. Le Cymbalta, une drogue psychiatrique prescrite pour soigner la dépression et l'anxiété, est maintenant vendu sous le nom de Yentrève pour venir à bout de l'incontinence urinaire. Les chercheurs psychiatriques testent des psychotropes pour des conditions aussi variées que l'obésité, l'alcoolisme, la passion du jeu, les bouffées de chaleur, l'herpès, la nausée, les démangeaisons, les tremblements et la tendance à s'arracher les cheveux. Il existe une pilule pour chaque maladie et on ne dit à pratiquement personne à quel point ces psychotropes sont dangereux.
As a chemist, I'm making these drugs. They're proving deadly in our labs, and they're proving deadly in other labs. Dangerous, ineffective, causing the exact same thing they're supposed to treat. How are they selling them?
For anyone who's given a label of a psychotic illness, drugs seem to be the automatic choice of treatments as night follows day.
That's all psychiatry does. It's dominated by psychopharmacologists who do nothing but manage symptoms by dispensing pills. That's it. And they don't work. But the fact that they don't work works to the advantage of the drug companies and the psychiatrists, which means that you're not cured, which means that you're a patient for life, you're a customer, you're a client for life. And the worse your health gets, the more drugs you need. It's a great deal for them.
We should all be up in arms about the way we're being treated by psychiatry today. This is a very dangerous industry that has gone so far overboard in inventing fictitious diseases and drugging our children and our population that I consider it to be engaged in crimes against humanity.
Avec plus de 80 milliards de dollars rapportés par an par les psychotropes, il est impossible d'échapper à la vague de maladies psychiatriques qui submerge la société d'aujourd'hui. Mais derrière le marketing des psychotropes se cache un secret que les patients des psychiatres seraient choqués d'apprendre. Comment a-t-on testé ces médicaments et quels en sont les dangers?
No one knows precisely how these psychiatric medications act.
We don't know if I give you a medication if it is going to work or not.
There's not a great deal of scientific support for using them.
I myself, I try to pick a drug whose side effects might be useful.
You have to choose what is the best option.
We don't have sure methods.
There are no rules. Everything it's an art, really.
Often it's trial and error.
It's a kind of a trial and error.
It's trial and error.
Some degree of trial and error, I guess.
A blind man's bluff or something like that.
You never know if it's the right drug.
It's a much more complex subject.
There's always going to be huge surprises, and that's what makes it so difficult. The best psychiatrists in the world will mess up all the time.
The American public is being treated as a mass medical experiment. We are all being treated like guinea pigs by the pharmaceutical companies, the psychiatric industry, and the FDA.
They are basically
testing drugs on large parts of the population without really knowing what the results are going to be.
It's a very dire situation that we're facing. We're talking about people's health and in many situations, people's lives. These are very serious issues.
Comme toutes les substances chimiques dangereuses, les psychotropes sont contrôlés étroitement par les autorités dans le monde entier. Et pour qu'un nouveau psychotrope soit mis sur le marché, il doit être soumis à un test destiné à protéger le public.
When a pharmaceutical company develops a new drug that they want to send to the market, what they do is they have to run it through clinical trials. They have to be able to provide to the FDA safety data to say this is a safe and effective drug.
In clinical trials, psychiatrists are engaged to do the research. And we could bank on the fact that these psychiatrists are tied to the pharmaceutical companies.
And a psychiatrist puts their name on there, they're seen as an expert. Talking mental drugs, who writes them? It's psychiatrists. So that's how it works. It's a terrible system.
The desperate thing about it is that it's all dressed up in the name of science. It's not science at all, it's pure marketing. But they get away with it because it's called science.
There's really no test, no x-ray, there's no chemistry that shows you have this condition. It's really just the opinion of someone who is probably taking money from pharmaceutical companies to prescribe drugs to people.
Where's the biochemistry? Where's the research? Where's the substantiation? And the answer is it vaporizes like mist in the morning. It's not there.
Mais le fait qu'il n'existe aucun test scientifique n'empêche pas les psychiatres de faire des essais cliniques avec des psychotropes dangereux. Les essais cliniques suivent un protocole scientifique précis à 4 phases. Les 3 premières étapes de l'essai doivent être remises aux autorités pour approbation. Dans la première phase, on vérifie si le médicament est toxique. Dans la deuxième, le médicament est soumis à des tests pour déterminer quel effet il a sur le corps. Si cette phase est acceptée, on passe à la phase 3. Mais vu qu'aucun laboratoire ne vérifie ni ne mesure de troubles mentaux, et vu qu'un profit important est en jeu, la recherche de psychotropes est un domaine sujet à de nombreuses interprétations subjectives et à la manipulation.
There are many places where you can tweak the study just a little bit with the study design or with the way you gather the data or the way the data are reported. And there's so many different ways you could bias a study.
I've seen what they did to the data in these trials. There's no question that they manipulated the data.
For example, let's say they had 100 people to start with. 40% drop out. 30% have a positive response. 30% have no response. They then say that they have a 50% response rate, when in fact, most of us would say it's a 30% response rate because only 30 out of the original 100 really responded. And so you can see that that's a little bit of a manipulation of the research data.
When they design drug studies, they're only looking at the one thing they want to see. And they don't report all the other things that are happening.
Par exemple, l'antidépresseur Cymbalta.
Lilly, I believe, in February of 2004, did a clinical trial study. The people in this clinical trial did not have symptoms of depression. And in that clinical trial, there were 11 attempted suicides and 4 suicides completed. One of which was Tracy Johnson, 19-year-old college girl. She did not have any symptoms of depression, and yet this drug pushed her to commit suicide by hanging herself.
That shoots the theory down that they say that, people get suicidal because of the, underlying illness that people kill themselves, that these weren't suicidal people to begin with. These weren't depressed at all. These were healthy people.
Une abondante couverture médiatique en a résulté. Mais les psychiatres qui faisaient partie du comité d'évaluation des psychotropes de la FDA ont ignoré ce cas de suicide et ont décidé d'approuver le Cymbalta en août.
One of the reasons why we have underestimated the potential of some psychiatric antidepressant drugs to actually trigger a suicidal kind of behavior in people is because the people who designed the research study didn't include in the research questionnaire this suicidal behavior. And then you can report that we had 0 incidents of this type of behavior among our subjects.
And then the response is trumpeted as if there's something magical about it, when in fact what's happened is a whole statistical tap dance routine that violates good science. However, on the basis of that kind of phony trial, the drug can be marketed.
Keep in mind that when a drug is tested in the clinical trials, it's only a very short period of time. The final phase of testing can be anywhere from 5 to 6 weeks.
The longest of those studies was 8 weeks. The shortest was 4 weeks. So these are not long-term studies. I think most physicians and most people taking the drugs assume they're long-term, 1 year, 2 years, 3 year studies. They're not. They're very, very short studies.
I find it pretty outrageous that we can base a multi-billion-dollar industry on a few 6 or 8 week clinical trials where antidepressant medications beat a sugar pill by a few percentage points.
C'est sur la base de ces recherches tendancieuses que des psychotropes aux effets secondaires potentiellement mortels sont régulièrement approuvés sans restriction par la FDA. Comment cela est-il possible? Les psychotropes rapportent beaucoup d'argent et les comités d'approbation au sein de la FDA sont contrôlés par des individus qui retirent un profit de ces approbations.
The FDA panels that evaluate these drugs are largely psychiatrists. All of a sudden you discover there are 20 different pharmaceutical companies paying them, either grants or honorary or some other way. They're getting paid by the pharmaceutical industry.
If you have a psychiatrist who works at the FDA, he could also be being paid by industry. He might sit on industry panels or discussions or get paid to be a speaker. What I found in working with physicians at the FDA was that they could have dual positions. They could sit on an industry board. They could be influenced by industry.
If you've got 10 FDA scientists or 10 committee members, it's just a matter of 6 saying yes, the drug is safe, 4 saying no. And in almost every single case, those 6 saying that the drug is safe and effective always have pharmaceutical ties. They're getting paid, they're getting funded somehow or another.
Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness, trouble sleeping, anxiety, or low energy? Ask your doctor about EffexorXR.
Une fois la phase 3 approuvée, comme on pouvait s'y attendre, une campagne de marketing acharnée commence. Mais si les psychiatres ont déjà commencé à promouvoir et à prescrire ces médicaments dans le monde entier, il reste néanmoins une phase de plus, la phase 4.
What phase 4 clinical trials are is when they've actually gotten the drug approved and then they get it into the general population so that we finally find out what it does when it hits ethnic populations, women, children.
Then we see who dies, who has seizures, who has deformed children, who has epilepsy, who has diseases downstream, whose heart stops.
The public is the clinical trial. That's where we find out the problems with these drugs.
This is an experimental stage, and it's so much so that one consumer protection group has advised patients that they refuse a prescription for any drug that hasn't already been on the market for 7 years.
So if you're taking a drug that's only been out for a year or 2 or 3, you are a guinea pig.
Mais l'expérimentation ne s'arrête pas là. Utilisant le manuel diagnostique et statistique des troubles mentaux et ces troubles inventés pour faire d'autres tests, les psychiatres vont accroître leurs profits en ciblant les personnes les plus inoffensives.
If they test their drugs on children, then they get a 6-month extension on their exclusivity period or patent period.
Ce centre psychiatrique de recherche sur les psychotropes situé au Texas utilise des annonces pour inciter des enfants à se porter volontaires. Une fois qu'ils sont dans le centre, les artifices les plus élémentaires sont utilisés pour les attirer davantage.
This is where they're going to be playing. We have Game Boys, we have Xbox, we have 5 TVs.
They come in here and they help themselves to crackers, cookies, free candy, free crackers.
Everything is paid for. You don't pay for anything.
Mais ces privilèges ne sont que des pièges pour persuader ces enfants d'avaler des psychotropes puissants connus pour provoquer le suicide et la violence chez des enfants de leur âge.
These are drugs that would cost maybe several $100s a month in a pharmacy. They actually are getting them free in research.
We love children and we just love children because they're our future.
By conducting those tests on children, they get a financial incentive that's worth over $1 billion. Those are the facts. You make of them what you will.
En raison des sommes d'argent mises en jeu, les expérimentations de psychotropes sur les enfants sont malheureusement de plus en plus nombreuses. 323 protocoles de recherche ont été conclus ou sont en cours, dont un test effectué en 2003 sur des adolescentes pour traiter les troubles de dysphorie prémenstruelle.
Those drugs which are barely more effective than placebos often have huge side effects which are dangerous and even deadly to people.
Families don't know the risk. If they actually were aware of the risk and believed it, no one would take that risk.
The psychiatrist would never, she didn't say one word to me about what was going to be the effects of the drugs.
No side effects listed, no, well, let's sit down, we have to talk about this. At that point in time, he said, well, this doesn't have that type of reaction on any children, you know, that it's very safe.
If he had told me then what I know now about it, I never would have taken it.
She said, oh, Beth must have been on Paxil. That's the only way she would kill herself. And I said, well, what is this? How do people know this? I didn't know anybody would know something like that. And we went on the internet, and all of a sudden you find out this it's not uncommon. But it's not uncommon for people to become psychotic on these drugs.
We're entitled to know the truth before we give a mind-altering drug to our children, our wife, our mother, our father, ourselves.
We don't really know what they're doing. That's what scares me. It's all made up theory. There are no facts about what these drugs really do. And if someone said, well, we don't know what this is going to do to you, good or bad, would you take that medication?
Now that is not the practice of medicine. That's the practice of marketing. And this practice of marketing is taking lives. And the poor patient doesn't even know it.
Mais dans le domaine des tests et du marketing des psychotropes, l'argent passe avant la sécurité. Les 10 psychotropes les plus souvent prescrits rapportent plus de 26 milliards et demi de dollars par an. Plus du double de l'argent fabriqué est mis en circulation chaque année par la Banque centrale des États-Unis. Mais pour pouvoir encaisser autant d'argent, les psychiatres doivent d'abord convaincre le segment de marché le plus important de tous, celui des prescripteurs de médicaments.
Psychiatrists specifically, they're just kind of working as sales agents for the pharmaceutical companies.
There's nothing like another doctor touting the benefits of your drug to drive market share.
They're an extended part of the marketing arm of these companies.
Medications play a primary role.
We give drugs.
Medication is a must.
There's a lot of new medications.
There are medications available for treating GAD.
Medications to use for PTSD.
Antipsychotic medications.
Atypical antipsychotics.
Benzodiazepines.
Stimulants.
Antidepressant medications.
MAOIs. Amphetamines.
Anticonvulsant medications.
Once the medications have been balanced out,
then we move on to a combination of 3 medicines.
There's no absolute limit that is set for the number of medications.
There are so many choices.
Apparently, we're willing to try almost anything.
Les psychotropes ne peuvent pas être vendus sans ordonnance. C'est pourquoi les firmes pharmaceutiques embauchent des psychiatres pour promouvoir les psychotropes dans le milieu psychiatrique et médical. Le chemin vers le profit commence dans les écoles médicales les plus prestigieuses au monde, précisément dans les bureaux des professeurs de psychiatrie les plus réputés. Grâce à leur caution, les firmes pharmaceutiques gagnent des milliards en vendant des psychotropes.
There are a lot of academic psychiatrists especially who have ties to 10 or 15 or 20 different pharmaceutical companies, and so they're making a very large amount of money.
Whether they're professors or whether they work at big, medical institutions, those drug companies will make sure that they've got them on the payroll somehow.
They'll have this person feed this information to their other peers, but it's all being motivated through monies being funded by pharmaceutical companies.
About 40% of the early stage marketing dollars for pharmaceutical companies go straight to these thought leaders, psychiatrists.
Ces accords financiers conclus avec de prétendus leaders d'opinion clés sont très lucratifs. Un professeur en psychiatrie réputé peut recevoir plus d'1 demi-million de dollars par an de la part des firmes pharmaceutiques.
These people are still considered the stars of their medical centers because they bring in all this great money from the pharmaceutical companies, and that helps keep the coffers of the medical center full.
Universities receive a lot of money from the pharmaceutical industry. Drug companies are building buildings right next to the medical school. They're funding research right and left.
The University of Michigan Depression Center received, I think it was $750,000 from Eli Lilly, and all they do down there is crank out this biological view of psychiatry and mental illness and depression.
Comme les professeurs en psychiatrie reçoivent des millions de la part des firmes pharmaceutiques pour les universités, il n'est pas surprenant que leur programme d'études soit axé sur les psychotropes.
Training programs in psychiatry, the majority of them now are drugs first. You know, you're really a psychopharmacologist in a way when you come out of a psych residency training program.
Even when I went to medical school, psychiatrists did talk to patients. Now all they do is write a prescription and send them away.
A psychiatrist is trained for one purpose, to administer psychiatric drugs.
Les professeurs en psychiatrie ne se contentent pas d'endoctriner les étudiants en psychiatrie et en médecine. Ils vantent aussi les vertus des psychotropes à leurs confrères. D'abord, en réalisant des essais cliniques que l'on fait passer comme objectifs et qui promeuvent à la fois un nouveau trouble psychiatrique inventé et le psychotrope censé le guérir. Ces recherches sont diffusées dans des revues spécialisées destinées à leurs confrères et on en fait mention dans les médias. Mais les lecteurs ne savent pas qu'environ 50% de ces psychiatres n'ont jamais participé à ces recherches.
One of the most unethical practices we're aware of is ghostwriting of journal articles, where somebody at the pharmaceutical company will write the paper and the academic physician will put his name on it and get it published in a major journal when he maybe changed 3 or 4 words in the whole article, and the article was basically written as a marketing tool by the drug company, and yet this academic puts his name on it as if he's the author.
He has had no part in the study, and also he probably hasn't even read the study results, but he is prepared to receive $10,000, $20,000 to put his name at the front of the research, which gives it added authority.
Il est si commun de faire rédiger des articles par d'autres en son nom que même le psychiatre qui dirige le département d'évaluation des psychotropes de la FDA signe de tels articles.
The average physician picks that up and reads it. He believes it. And it's not a mystery that he would believe it. It seems reasonable that it's in black and white, it's in a good journal, it's in the New England Journal of Medicine, it must be true.
Ces revues sont souvent envoyées gratuitement aux psychiatres et aux médecins sous le couvert de recherche médicale authentique. Mais pourquoi ces revues sont-elles gratuites? Parce que la publicité pour les psychotropes rapporte des sommes énormes à ceux qui les publient.
So if you go through a medical journal, you'll see page after page of advertising for bipolar disorder and treatment of using medications, or advertisings for depression and treatment of using medications, schizophrenia. So it's really everywhere.
I remember just a couple of years ago, the first time I opened the journal from the American Psychological Association called the APA Monitor, and there was a multi-page ad, high gloss, very expensive for Concerta, which is time-release Ritalin. I resigned from the American Psychological Association. I wasn't going to be part of this whatsoever.
It's very hard when your major source of income is advertising and advertising placement to write an article that's negative about a particular drug and expect that company to continue to buy ads in your medical journal. So that's a major issue.
Mais les psychiatres leaders d'opinion ne se contentent pas de remplir les revues médicales d'articles rédigés par d'autres et de les signer. Ils font aussi de la propagande pour les psychotropes durant des conférences de formation médicale continue.
Physicians and nurse practitioners and physicians assistants are mandated to take a certain amount of continuing education credits every year. Well, 70% of all continuing medical education is now funded by the pharmaceutical industry.
That seminar is going to be taught by a professional who is employed by the pharmaceutical company. The very nature of where someone is giving you your support means you are biased to that person's side.
Many physicians and many psychiatrists who attend medical conferences don't know that when they go to that conference meeting that's about antidepressants, antipsychotics, and it's generally an academic psychiatrist who's speaking, they don't realize that person's probably making about $10,000 for for that 1-hour speech.
Mais vous n'avez pas besoin d'être un professeur en psychiatrie pour avoir une part du gâteau. Les psychiatres qui prescrivent de nombreux psychotropes sont généreusement récompensés par les représentants pharmaceutiques pour les ventes qu'ils génèrent.
Psychiatrists, especially high prescribers, are targeted and gifted extensively by the industry. Now that gifting is where you need to get specific.
That was not unusual during our marketing conversations to say, well, what's our top drug writer? You know, who's the doctor that's prescribing the most of this drug? Well, you know, let's send them to the Kentucky Derby.
We offered trips on some occasions to come out and hear a 2-hour talk, but it happened to be on a nice island in Hawaii.
There were a lot of things that we did day in and day out to try to get the doctors to write our drugs, or in my case, to write for the psychiatric drugs. We did a lot of lunches and dinners, and we brought in speakers, and those speakers were obviously paid by us, and we would wave, you know, renowned studies at them from renowned journals. But of course, we would never say that these studies were paid for by our company, and that it was written by a ghostwriter who was paid by our company, or that our company tends to do a ton of advertising within that particular medical journal. We would never say that.
Avec plus de 300 millions d'ordonnances de psychotropes, les plus gros prescripteurs sont d'autant plus grassement récompensés lorsqu'ils ouvrent de nouveaux marchés. Les primes qu'ils reçoivent des firmes pharmaceutiques sont jusqu'à 25% supérieures à celles des autres spécialités médicales, soit en moyenne dans un État américain plus de 45 000 $ par an pour un psychiatre renommé.
Psychiatrists get more kickback from the pharmaceutical companies than any other branch of medicine.
The profession of psychiatry couldn't keep its journals afloat, couldn't keep its conferences afloat, couldn't keep its organizations afloat without money from drug companies. The drug companies really have psychiatry in their pocket.
This is a profession whose diagnoses have been heavily influenced by people who are heavily influenced by the pharmaceutical industry, and whose treatments are almost exclusively these days pharmaceuticals. We should be able to count on them. I do not believe that we can.
En raison de la publicité constante faite par les psychiatres, les psychotropes sont prescrits non seulement en psychiatrie, mais ils s'infiltrent aussi dans tout le milieu médical. Mais ce battage présente une autre facette, bien plus lucrative pour les psychiatres. Et cela vous concerne, vous, directement.
Abilify helps control symptoms of bipolar mania.
Ask your doctor about Effexor XR.
Paxil, the most prescribed medication of its kind.
Prozac Weekly is here. Zoloft, a prescription.
Seraphim, PMDD.
Les psychiatres et les firmes pharmaceutiques ne font pas uniquement du battage auprès de ceux qui prescrivent des psychotropes. Ils ciblent aussi directement le consommateur, vous, et s'attendent à ce que vous veniez leur demander une ordonnance.
The direct-to-consumer advertising is instilling the notion in every human being that something is mentally wrong, something needs correction. That drives people to see a psychiatrist to help to mitigate this by dispensing the medication, by dispensing a drug that they have had pushed on them on countless television ads, countless magazine ads, and countless print ads that say, hey, there's something wrong with you, go get help for it.
C'est à la télévision que l'on constate surtout cette explosion de publicité vers le consommateur. Cela n'a pas toujours été le cas. Jusqu'à récemment, la publicité télévisée pour les psychotropes était très limitée. Mais en 1997, la FDA a été persuadée d'assouplir ses règlements sur la publicité pour les psychotropes dans les médias, en violation directe de l'article 10 d'un traité international signé avec l'ONU.
Every 5 minutes there's a new drug ad. And this is not by accident, this is cold, canny, scientific design.
Ads are fundamentally of two types. One type of ad is a effort to try to get the patient to take the drug company's drug.
Abilify helps control symptoms of bipolar mania and reduce...
But then the second kind of direct-to-consumer advertising is the you're sick and you didn't know it advertising.
You could be suffering from generalized anxiety disorder.
Because they want to create sales, so what they're going to do is tell people, do you have these symptoms? Do you have this disease? Do you have this particular condition?
But they hit it so hard on television that people say, ask your doctor, ask your doctor. Every commercial is a referral to the doctor. See, they're working for each other.
Ask your doctor about Cymbalta. Depression hurts. Cymbalta can help.
I can go to my doctor and say, here are my symptoms, and walk out with the prescription I want. I can ask for a drug by name, and most of the time I'll be given drugs. So basically I'm my own doctor.
The industry defends what it's doing by saying this is some kind of public health education campaign. And I'm sorry, I think if you go to an advertising agency, you're advertising.
Dès le début, la publicité télévisée pour les psychotropes a connu un succès phénoménal. Les 3 premières années, les ventes de psychotropes ont augmenté de 250%. L'industrie pharmaceutique dépense 2,9 milliards de dollars par an pour la publicité télévisée et fait maintenant un chiffre d'affaires plus haut que jamais. Une fois que les patients affluent dans les cabinets des psychiatres, ils se font prendre au piège avec un autre stratagème de vente, les échantillons gratuits.
The industry is willing to give out millions of dollars worth of free samples because it generates billions of dollars in sales.
You want a prescription and you want Prozac written forever as a maintenance therapy. So you establish that with some free Prozac up front.
Here, take this sample, it doesn't cost you anything, and then if you like it or if it seems to work, then we'll make a prescription, but you're going to have to pay for that prescription. The sample is free. So it's really a marketing technique.
They got a cash cow. Zero refill means you've got to go back to the doctor for another consultation, for another subscription, and it just goes forever. This is business. This is money.
Leur marketing direct auprès du consommateur est parfois positionné en tant qu'information publique. Les psychiatres utilisent régulièrement les médias pour avertir le grand public des dernières épidémies de maladies mentales et lui fourguer le fruit de leurs dernières recherches. Ils écrivent des articles pour les journaux et les magazines qui soutiennent leur campagne de sensibilisation à la santé mentale. Même les associations de soutien des malades qui prétendent offrir des informations impartiales sur les psychotropes sont, si l'on y regarde de plus près, contrôlées par des psychiatres et subventionnées par l'industrie pharmaceutique.
They were started specifically by the industry themselves, and the public isn't informed of that. You know, it's basically a great big lie to the public that they think they're going to a charitable organization that has their best interest at heart.
Par exemple, l'association SHAD, pour enfants et adultes souffrant du trouble du déficit de l'attention, est l'association qui reçoit le plus de subventions des fabricants de psychotropes. Stephen Plog est un ancien cadre de SHAD.
When I became the CHAD coordinator for Las Vegas, they gave me a manual, and in it said, we want to provide unbiased information to help and support people who have ADD. For the next 30 days, we put 22 parents and their kids on a program with lab tests to find out what their causes were, eliminated their causes, they got prescription-free, medication-free, side-effect-free, and they got better with their self-esteem, and they became actually happier, healthier, and more successful. Chad found out about this, called me up and says, we do not allow people to talk about nutrition in any of our seminars. We only prescribe going to a psychiatrist who will only prescribe drugs and therapy. So they said you can no longer work with us, and they fired me for simply recommending that parents go get a lab test, find out what the causes are, and eliminate the causes. They do not allow that. They only allow medication and psychiatric treatment.
Les associations psychiatriques de soutien aux malades font aussi la promotion des traitements à base de psychotropes en utilisant des questionnaires marketing qu'ils font passer pour des questionnaires médicaux.
You can take a survey of maybe 16 questions. And if you are a normal human being who's lived through ranges of emotions of normal life experience, if you've known the exhilaration of the birth of a child, a niece, a nephew, and the devastation of a divorce and the loss of dreams, and answer honestly to those questions, you will diagnose yourself as bipolar. And the instructions that come back along with the diagnosis or the warning that you're probably bipolar say, print this out and take it to your doctor.
Pour montrer à quel point il est facile d'aller sur Internet, de répondre à des questions personnelles et de se retrouver avec un diagnostic psychiatrique, voici quelques bénévoles choisis au hasard, des gens de tout âge, menant une vie normale.
Do you feel sad, blue, unhappy, or down in the dumps?
Sometimes.
I've had periods of great optimism and other periods of equally great pessimism. Yeah, that happens a little bit.
I get tired for no reason, sometimes.
My life is pretty full. Nah, not really.
For no apparent reason, I sometimes have been very angry or hostile.
It's hard for me to concentrate on reading.
I am restless and can't keep still.
My heart beats faster than usual.
I have trouble sleeping, shortness of breath.
Gained weight.
Trembling hands.
I have an idea that most of these are going to be sometimes.
Everyone has.
As in everybody?
Somewhat.
Somewhat true.
Just a little.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Alright, my score totaled 42. Bipolar disorder, moderate to severe symptoms. Wow.
The answer reflects on the presence of depressive symptoms.
Currently suffering from an anxiety disorder.
I may be suffering from bipolar 1.
Minimal to mild depression.
An obsessive compulsive disorder.
Guess that means I'm a psycho.
Guess I'll go to a psych. Try to see if I could work it out, get some meds or something.
Résultat, des troubles mentaux ont été diagnostiqués chez 50% de ces personnes à qui on a conseillé de suivre un traitement. De la sorte, la moitié de la population américaine, 150 millions de personnes, pourraient être catégorisées comme mentalement malades.
Now you have a direct line of consumers just walking in with a little pre-survey that says that they potentially can have bipolar, ADHD, stress, anxiety, any of those categories, and they just need to take this assessment tool and say, okay, that basically that is what you have and here's your drug.
Les psychiatres veulent maintenant rendre ces tests d'évaluation obligatoires. Par exemple, le Teen Screen, ce soi-disant programme de prévention du suicide, permet de faire des tests de santé mentale sur des élèves afin d'établir un diagnostic et de leur administrer des psychotropes. Des adolescents normaux, comme Chelsea Rhodes, se rendent un jour à l'école et rentrent chez eux étiquetés malades mentaux.
The Rhodes family in Indiana, their young girl went to school one day, and all of a sudden they told her they were taking her into her room, and they move her into her room and give her the 10-minute teen screen test. And shortly after taking the test, she's pulled aside in the hallway and she's told she has two problems, basically, two mental problems. One, obsessive compulsive disorder, and social anxiety disorder.
Her parents were stunned, dumbfounded. They didn't know the teen screen was going to screen their child. They had not been asked permission.
People at school had told her that she was mentally ill with these two conditions based off of a computer test that took her 10 minutes to answer. One of the questions was worded, if Chelsea went out a lot. She answered no. We'd ask her why she answered that way. She said, because Mom, you and Dad don't allow us to go out on school nights. I have to be home to do my homework and take care of our household chores. The other question was, do you ever feel nervous or anxious when you're in front of a group of your friends or peers? Chelsea answered yes. She explained to us that because when she has to stand up in front of a group of people and give a book report in one of her classes, she's very nervous. You know, I'm 43 years old and I'm nervous in front of every one of you today, but that doesn't make me mentally ill.
I absolutely believe that the survey for Teen Screen was intentionally structured to flag as many children as possible as having a possible mental health problem.
Et qui a inventé le Teen Screen et le test qui s'y rattache? Le docteur David Schaffer, un psychiatre largement payé par l'industrie pharmaceutique. Le questionnaire de Schaffer n'a rien de scientifique. Dans une étude qu'il a lui-même conduite, Schaffer a admis que 84% des élèves avaient été faussement classifiés comme suicidaires. Mais il n'a pas admis les conséquences désastreuses que cela a pu avoir. Alia Gleason n'avait que 11 ans quand elle a fait un test de dépistage dans son collège au Texas.
It was 7th grade, and they had all the girls go into the cafeteria because they said that a lot of girls have depression, so they was working on some depression screen.
Next thing I know, there's those middle schools tell my husband now that CPS is there at the school, taking a layer because she's suicidal.
I'm like, suicide? I'm not trying to kill myself. I love myself. I've always loved myself.
So I don't know if she was eating at the school or they already taken her away.
When they took her layer, my girls and I, we didn't sleep for about a good 3 days. For the first 3 days, because my house was empty without her.
And they was making me sign papers talking about if you don't take these medicines, you can't see your parents. So they was telling me, you know, if you take your medicine, you can see your parents.
My daughter was on 22 different types of medication that this one psychiatrist gave her.
They drugged me up so bad that they said they had to drag me. And I used to wonder how I got to my room.
When I saw for myself what they were giving her and how much and how often, I just thought, they're gonna kill this child. And the parents were helpless.
Then after a while, that's when I was just like, I'm not about to take no more medicine until I call my parents. And then that's when they was like, okay, well, we're gonna give it to you anyways. They restrained me and shot me up. I was in 4 points. They laid me out on my stomach with my feet like this and tied me up.
One day, they must have put her in about 12 restraints in one day.
They said I was restrained about 70 or 80 times. After a couple of months, they was like, you know, your parents don't want to see you. They don't want to talk to you or anything. So I was really hurt.
We tried everything. Nobody know. We didn't know what hospital. We didn't even know where they taking her.
After 2 weeks, you're supposed to hear, or you're supposed to be able to see your child. They didn't give me that. I didn't see a layer to 6 months later.
But I was a good child. I didn't deserve for that. And it messed up a lot of things. To this day, I still wish that I could just go back and be like, man, you know what, I'm not even gonna take the test.
I would always tell every parent I see, and they was asking me, don't do the team screening, because it will mess up your family.
Les programmes de dépistage des troubles mentaux tels que celui-ci sont à la mode. Dans le cadre du programme de dépistage Teen Screen, des tests de dépistage ont été effectués auprès de centaines de milliers d'écoliers dans 500 écoles de 43 États américains.
Has nothing to do with helping kids, has nothing to do with mental health, has nothing to do with medicine. It has everything to do with the pushing of drugs.
So it presents itself as being a wonderful, altruistic program, whereas in fact, I believe its cold-blooded and cold-hearted intent is to recruit more children into the very subjective diagnoses of mental illness and to treat those kids with medication.
Mais la prise forcée de psychotropes ne se limite pas aux salles de classe. Une nouvelle loi vient d'être votée pour faire passer des tests payants de dépistage des maladies mentales à tous les citoyens, y compris les personnes âgées, les anciens combattants et les femmes enceintes.
Psychiatrists benefit from both ends, from the pharmaceutical end for being paid to write the prescription, and then from the patient for being there to receive the prescription.
It's an industry that cannot allow the human condition to go unmedicated, and I think this is where the problem begins.
If everybody considers themselves to be sick in some way or more than one way, and that the only control, the only hope for their happiness is to be on pills for the rest of their lives, that's the goal.
The pharmaceuticals and the psychiatric community are in a cleanup, and that's what it's all about. It has nothing to do with helping our kids or, you know, their mental health. It's all about money.
Aujourd'hui, les firmes pharmaceutiques dépensent plus de 5,3 milliards de dollars par an pour le marketing des psychotropes, presque 9 fois plus qu'il y a 10 ans. Résultat, les ventes mondiales de psychotropes ont atteint 80 milliards de dollars. Pendant ce temps, les psychiatres refusent de considérer l'étendue des tragédies qu'ils laissent dans leur sillage.
I'm 10 years old, and I'm going to read, I think, the side effects of a drug called Daytriana.
The drug Adderall. Luvox. Cymbalta.
Gyudon. Lexapro.
Namenda.
I have a question.
Where do I find the side effects?
How do I read it if it's so small?
Just a bunch of letters squished together.
I can't read this. This is the side effects of the drug.
Side effects. Stroke.
What the heck?
Speech disorder.
Eye disorders, vision blurred.
Dry mouth. Nervous.
Tremor. Dizziness, delirium, and coma.
Tardive dyskinesia.
They experience worsening of their depression.
Aggressive reaction. Paranoid reaction.
Psychosis.
Serious cardiovascular events.
Other serious heart problems.
Heart failure.
What? Suicide. suicidal thoughts, suicidal thinking and behavior,
increases the risk of suicide,
an increased risk of death, sudden death.
These guys must be kidding.
Wow. This is a guess.
Seeing this on a warning label, does anybody have any clue what they're putting their kids into?
This isn't good.
No drug has side effects. They're all effects. Side effect is just a way that doctors explain away the effects that they don't like or you won't like, but they're effects.
These are the effects of these drugs. They're not just what might happen to you, they're what happen more often than not.
We name them side effects because they're an unintended consequence.
The antidepressant drugs not only don't make you happy, they have all kinds of negative effects on the system as a whole.
These drugs are absorbed and distributed throughout your entire body, so they have side effects through all of your tissues and organs, including your liver and your kidneys and your nervous system.
They destroy the brain, the neural net. They literally kill brain cells and cause all kinds of brain disorders. That's why we have they're not side effects, they're direct effects.
Mais si les psychiatres minimisent continuellement les effets de ces médicaments sur la santé, ils les reconnaissent ouvertement devant nos caméras.
I think I tell them the main side effects. I don't tell them every side effect because there's so many possible side effects.
I would say the majority of patients experience some side effects.
People get side effects to every medication you try.
They all have side effects.
All kinds of side effects, lots of side effects. Physical feelings of sickness.
Headaches, insomnia.
They can't sleep, they can't eat.
Drowsiness. Sedation is very frequent.
Restlessness, appetite stimulation,
neurologic side effects,
tremor or muscle spasms,
stiffness, weight gain,
obesity,
weight gain and stuff like that,
decreased performance of sexual functioning, sexual side effects can happen,
sexual dysfunction, etc.
I've never had anybody die or anything, but I've had people faint and stuff, and it's really sort of unpredictable.
You name it and it can be a side effect.
Et pourquoi les psychiatres ne peuvent-ils pas prédire les effets secondaires que vous ressentirez? Parce qu'aucun d'eux n'a la moindre idée de la façon dont leurs médicaments agissent.
At least with street drugs, people know that they're dangerous, that they should be off of them. With pharmaceuticals, people are told they're safe to take every day.
Mais les psychotropes sont loin d'être sans danger. Et on en parle de plus en plus en raison de leur toxicité et des décès qu'ils entraînent.
Some of the side effects that have become of concern lately are suicide, increased risk of suicide, increased risk of homicide.
These aren't people that were horribly depressed when they were given a drug. These are people who are given a drug for social anxiety or difficulty sleeping or mild depression and then become suicidal. And so when they become suicidal and they kill themselves, what the doctor does is go back and say, oh, well, it's because they were depressed.
The label itself, the disorder, is what is blamed for the side effects. When in reality, it's the drug that is causing the side effect. It is the drug that is the problem.
Des médicaments similaires à l'antidépresseur prescrit à Woody Witzak, qu'il prit non pas pour soigner une maladie mentale, mais pour l'aider à dormir.
My husband and I, Tim, his nickname Woody, we were married just 2 months shy of 10 years, so we've had a long life together. And Woody was a guy who was healthy. He was a big runner. He's never had a history of depression or any other so-called mental illness. He was given Zoloft for insomnia. I find Woody one night completely sweat through his shirt in fetal position, kept going, Kim, you gotta help me, I don't know what's happening to me. It's like my head's outside my body looking in. Kim, help me, help me. We did breathing, listened to music, prayed, anything to calm him down from this head outside his body feeling. And a week later, he was found dead hanging. A guy who loved life.
Les psychiatres prétendent que leurs psychotropes sauvent des vies, mais d'après leurs propres recherches, les psychotropes doublent les risques de suicide. Et l'un d'eux multiplie ce risque pratiquement par 7.
As a pharmacist who has been studying the problem for the past 7 years, I do see a glaring connection between the high use of these psychoactive substances and the rise of violence.
If people knew that the mechanism was not known of these drugs, that they could
cause, if there's a real chance for them to get a homicidal tendency or even suicide, if you take the drug, there's a chance you may want to kill yourself.
And I could repeat probably a dozen other examples of significant self-inflicted harm or significant violence to others in patients who had never had that experience in their adult life.
Des patients comme Donald Shell, un grand-père venant du Wyoming.
Donald Shell was a man in his 60s, a gentleman, a family man, a funny man. He had had periodic episodes of depression, but never any real serious mental health issues, and became depressed, had a down period, went to a general practitioner, and was given Paxil. 2 days later, he shot his wife, his daughter, his 9-month-old granddaughter, and then himself. The first question the jury was asked, very telling question, can Paxil cause some people to commit homicide and or suicide? To which they answered yes.
Donald Shell ne prenait du Paxil que depuis quelques jours avant d'avoir cette réaction meurtrière suite à la prise du médicament. Mais on a aussi prouvé qu'un emploi prolongé de psychotropes crée des dommages irréversibles, une situation dramatique dont les psychiatres ne font pas cas.
In the long run, the side effects may actually be worse than the original condition.
I don't think the average patient has any idea that the long-term use of this drug is now associated with very serious diseases, with diabetes, with kidney failure, with tardive dyskinesia, a movement disorder that's very serious and permanent and irreversible.
You can be affected by these drugs in any part of your body, your brain, your heart, your kidneys.
That's why people die early very often, because they are prescribed things and the long-term effects are, in some cases, the death of the individual.
Pour le profit, les psychiatres prescrivent plusieurs psychotropes, les uns remédiant aux effets des autres, créant ainsi encore plus de dommages.
If you have drugs that create side effects, that gives you a ready market for more drugs to cure the side effects. It seems to me that it's a self-propagating system.
And what ends up happening is that each one of those new drugs that's added into the scenario brings on another symptom for which there's another drug, for which there's another symptom, for which there's another drug.
And it just snowballs into a vicious circle of one drug causing the need for another drug.
Sometimes people come and they're on such a cocktail of so many different drugs for so many different things.
It's rare now that I see a senior citizen that is on less than 5 or 6 drugs at one time. Some 12, 15.
One will lead to the next, and they're all toxic. This is how the game is played.
Alors que l'activité lucrative des psychiatres qui consiste à prescrire des psychotropes prend de plus en plus d'expansion au cœur de la société, les enfants sont désormais leur dernière et plus tragique victime.
Rebecca Riley, 2.5 years old, they diagnosed her with bipolar disorder and ADHD. They had her on an antipsychotic, they had her on a heart drug, they say, for ADHD, and they had her on an anti-seizure. And then one other one for side effects. 4 drugs at 2.5 years old. She can't even zip up her own pants. She's like a little rag doll. The school nurse, 2 teachers, the principal, the social worker, all said they never seen any behavior in this little 4-year-old girl that would warrant these kind of medications. And all specifically called this doctor and said, please take her off these. She died at a little over 4 years old. This little girl that didn't have a chance, and the psychiatrist just let her.
Au lieu d'être jugé et d'encourir une peine de prison, le docteur Kayoko Kifuji, psychiatre de Rebecca Riley, n'a même pas perdu sa licence. Comment se fait-il que les psychiatres s'en tirent à si bon compte? La réponse se trouve dans le concept légal connu sous le nom de normes en matière de soins.
The standard of care is based on what do other doctors do? What would a reasonable physician do in this situation? And the reality is that what most physicians do is prescribe medications.
As long as they've done their paperwork properly and documented that this child had the symptoms that led them to this conclusion, they appear to be completely protected from any kind of a lawsuit as a result.
The standard of care is what allows doctors to seriously injure or even kill a patient with total impunity.
So the standard of care now has been implemented to where you can get away with, if you're a medical doctor, psychiatrist, you can get away with murder.
Et le nombre de décès continue à augmenter. Les psychotropes tuent environ 42 000 personnes par an.
The cost to society is very real and very devastating. But the medicine they're practicing isn't real. It's a hoax.
Profit always comes before patient safety, and they take a very short-sighted view. It's all about how can we make money today, not what price are we going to pay tomorrow.
The trail of destruction that a psychiatrist leaves in his path is of no concern to that guy. It's all about money.
C'est une affaire de gros sous. La psychiatrie représente maintenant une industrie de plus de 300 milliards de dollars et ne guérit personne. Mais si les psychiatres promettent de plus en plus de nouveaux traitements, le nombre de leurs victimes, malades, blessés ou décédés, ne cesse d'augmenter. Et les gens, tout comme vous, se retrouvent sans défense et forcés de se débrouiller tout seuls.
My wife and I are blessed. We have 7 children, and we love them all. They're all our favorites. Each child we have is our favorites. And Beth was extremely special.
She was kind, generous.
She had like a really sweet and caring personality.
She had this beautiful smile, like an inviting.
She could make friends with basically any stranger on the street and get a smile or a laugh out of them.
Beth was having a hard time sleeping for maybe 4, 5, or 6 weeks. And so we said, Beth, you should go to the doctor and get something to help you sleep.
He said, okay, well, I'll try to give you something to lessen your anxiety, and it should help you sleep.
Within 5 minutes, a 5-minute visit, he prescribed her Paxil.
When I first saw Beth right after she went on the Paxil, she was different. Like, I felt like she was drugged.
And by the 2nd or 3rd day, she's like, I don't know, I just don't feel right. You know, I feel strange in my skin.
But after about 3 or 4 days, I remember that Beth was, at times, very different, like sullen, keeping to herself.
My mom and her were having dinner, and she said she didn't have any real emotion. Like, she kind of felt emotionally numb.
She was like a different person. Like, she just seemed like she was under the influence of something. She didn't seem like herself. She seemed like she was tripping out.
I talked to her on the phone, and she told me she didn't want to be there. And I was like, why don't you want to be there? She's like, I just don't feel like myself. I just feel like crazy. I just don't feel right.
I truly believe that she was hallucinating maybe and going in and out of this psychotic state at this point.
It seemed like she was melting down, like emotionally. She was becoming worse every day.
I said, are you suicidal? I actually asked her. And she laughed at me. And she said, no, I would never do that.
And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm just gonna lay down next to her and I'll rub her head and I'll talk to her and we'll try to figure out what we're gonna do because something's not right here. And my son Matthew was right behind me going upstairs. And when I got to the top of the stairs, I saw her hanging in the hallway.
Then the police were all over the place and people were coming and going, and about 3 hours, 4 hours after my daughter died, one of my friends came over and said, you know, I was speaking to so-and-so, one of our other friends, and she said, oh, Beth must have been on Paxil. That's the only way she would kill herself.
It just wasn't her. There was nothing in her that would have done that. She was the most non-violent, like gentle. It's a violent way to die.
It had to be the drug. There was no other answer.
If we knew what we knew now, Beth would be here with us today. I know that for a fact.
L'histoire tragique de Bess Winter n'est qu'une histoire parmi tant d'autres, une histoire qui se répète chaque fois que des psychotropes sont prescrits. Les psychiatres veulent vous faire croire que leurs psychotropes sont efficaces et sans danger, vu qu'ils sont experts en matière de santé mentale et pas vous. Mais de nombreux cas montrent qu'il peut s'avérer désastreux d'avoir confiance en eux.
Psychiatry is pseudoscience. It's false science. It cannot withstand rigorous review if people would just look at the evidence.
If they help anyone, it's not worth the risk to the people that are harmed by them.
They are betraying every customer they have.
They don't know what they're doing, and we need to educate the public to use their feet and walk away.
Comment le public peut-il être davantage informé? En exigeant le respect d'un droit médical essentiel, peu connu des patients, mais que les psychiatres connaissent très bien.
We want to be able to present the patient with alternatives. And one of the central ideas in ethics is informed consent.
The components of informed consent are letting the person know, first of all, what the diagnosis is and what it's based on, so that they can say, this is why we need to treat you. And secondly, what the treatment is.
Every patient in the healthcare system has a right to informed consent. That is, they have a right to be told the risks and benefits of the treatment, the risks and benefits of alternative treatments, and the risks and benefits of no treatment at all.
Patients should be totally informed, fully informed about every medication that the psychiatrist offers to them to take or says they should take.
Et les études confirment que le public ne reçoit que peu d'informations complètes et exactes au sujet des psychotropes. Quelles informations complètes et exactes une personne devrait-elle recevoir avant de consentir à prendre des psychotropes? Les médecins et spécialistes présentés ici ont une grande expérience dans ce domaine. Premier argument qu'ils avancent, les troubles psychiatriques ne sont pas de véritables maladies qui nécessitent des soins médicaux.
It's true that there's no biological findings that really support any of these psychiatric diagnoses being medical illnesses. And the burden of proof really is the other way around. It's not that you have to prove that there is no biological science. The burden is on psychiatry to prove that there is.
There's no blood test. There's no lab test. There's no x-ray. These are just clusters of behavior that a group of psychiatrists have voted that it's a disease.
Can you imagine doctors having to have powwows to decide if a heart attack is a real disease or not? No, they don't have to decide that. They don't have to have a vote on that.
They should be asking the doc, geez doc, where's the chemical test for that? Where is the objective test for this? And I guarantee you that they'll be told, we don't have a chemical test for that.
There is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. And any psychiatrist that you talk to, if you ask him this question, they'll all admit it in private, but they won't admit it in public. It's a scandal.
So this is all subjective. Nothing objective about psychiatry.
Deuxièmement, il n'existe aucun document scientifique prouvant que les psychotropes guérissent le moindre trouble mental.
Since there is no measurement for these psychiatric diagnoses, because they're really just subjective, for the same reason there really can't be a measurement for the effects of the drug.
In terms of medication, the evidence that's claimed is the medications are highly effective and not very toxic. But actually, in fact, the data in psychiatry are very clear that that's not true. What is true is that the medications are barely, if at all, more effective than placebo.
You're selling drugs to people under false premises, under a disease that's been invented. So how do you measure efficacy among a disease that doesn't even exist?
Troisièmement, les psychotropes camouflent les symptômes tout en créant des effets secondaires graves à court et à long terme.
Whatever problem you're being treated for, whether it's depression, real or otherwise, or cardiovascular disease, medicating away the symptoms is not solving the problem.
The patent medication gives the appearance of having helped because in the short term, it usually doesn't show the bad effects that are going to happen in the long term. So it's very deceptive.
The longer the patient's on the medication, the worse the prognosis is.
None of these medications hit precise targets. You begin accumulating all kinds of collateral damage. In other words, other organs in the body are actually harmed.
So for the first time, we're seeing kids in grade school or middle school who have type 2 diabetes and who have the beginning stages of cardiovascular disease.
So you see Parkinson's disease, you see tardive dyskinesias, you see other movement disorders.
Is it true that we're now seeing a lot of deaths from psychiatric drugs? Absolutely yes.
Quatrièmement, les psychotropes peuvent créer un état de dépendance aux médicaments.
One of the hallmarks of informed consent with psychiatric meds is you have to discuss the potential for addiction.
The vast majority of psychiatric drugs create psychological and physical dependency.
Most patients that I've seen that were on these drugs have difficulty getting off of them. It's rare for somebody to just be able to stop it without a problem.
Cinquièmement, la plupart des troubles mentaux proviennent d'une maladie physique.
Many physical conditions can cause mental problems or what pose as psychiatric symptoms, but the psychiatrist, in the records I've reviewed, psychiatrist does not do an in-depth study of what could be causing the problem.
And if the doctor isn't taking the time to find the cause of those symptoms, then unfortunately those symptoms may continue and there may be a serious underlying medical disorder that's being overlooked.
The question is it better to treat depression with a drug, or is it better to treat depression by trying to figure out what caused the depression and working it out with the patient?
Dehydration can make you exhibit symptoms of depression. Sleeplessness can make you exhibit symptoms of depression. Eating a terrible diet, hypoglycemia, being sedentary, all of these things are biological reasons for having symptoms of depression.
I have in my practice children who are misdiagnosed as having ADD, ADHD, who really have Lyme disease.
70% of all what are classified as mental illnesses actually have a physical cause, a physical problem causing that.
Sixièmement, quel que soit l'état émotif ou psychologique d'une personne, il existe des méthodes alternatives efficaces qui ne comprennent pas de psychotropes.
Once you've proven that there is no problem in the body and that there is no malfunction in the brain, then you have to begin to address these other levels of the self. And I think that's what psychiatry has completely stopped doing.
There are very few conditions that cannot be treated by other methods than the use of drugs.
Any forces that impinge on medicine that make us think that the drug approach is the only approach is undermining good patient care.
Et comme le patient est rarement informé de l'existence de la plupart des méthodes alternatives non médicamenteuses, il ne consent presque jamais à un traitement en toute connaissance de cause.
When you get into informed consent, it's almost a responsibility of the patient to make an inquiry about the hazards of the drug and not rely on what the psychiatrist or physician tells them.
We can't go in and abdicate our responsibility as consumers simply because somebody has an MD after their name or someone is a psychiatrist and we think they know more than we do.
The best way to protect yourself is to educate yourself, is to ask questions not only of your doctor, but to do your own research.
Don't be ignorant, be informed. Get information from as many places as you can. That's how you'll be an intelligent, skeptical consumer, and that's how you will protect the safety of yourself, your children, and your entire family from this industry of death known as modern psychiatry.
De même que la psychiatrie s'est infiltrée partout dans la société au cours des 50 dernières années, il en est de même du dopage de psychotropes. Mais il existe un moyen de dénoncer ces mauvais traitements médicaux en rapportant tout sujet de plainte et tout effet secondaire des psychotropes auprès de votre Agence nationale de contrôle des médicaments. Aux États-Unis, l'agence fédérale MedWatch. En France, l'AFSAPS.
MedWatch is a voluntary reporting system, a passive reporting system where doctors, patients, healthcare providers, pharmacists, anybody really can make a report saying that they think that what they experienced or what their patient experienced was an adverse drug effect.
And this is what we call post-marketing surveillance. And this begins to get a look at what the side effects of long-term or chronic use of these drugs really is.
The FDA admits that probably only 1% of all the adverse drug effects are actually reported by patients or physicians.
Ce n'est qu'en rapportant tous les effets néfastes des psychotropes que l'on fera connaître l'horreur que constitue le fait d'être dopé à coups de psychotropes. Les faits vous ont été donnés. Montrez cette vidéo à votre médecin et ne permettez pas que vous, vos amis et ceux que vous aimez soyez les prochaines victimes du marché très lucratif des psychotropes. Pour en savoir plus au sujet de la psychiatrie et des prescriptions abusives de psychotropes ou pour rapporter les mauvais traitements des psychiatres, contactez la Commission des citoyens pour les droits de l'homme.